Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, January 8th, 2020, if you will, and I am prepping you for a day away from the live microphone for me. But as you know, there's just too much going on to leave you without new content, and I had planned to record the show for you a little earlier in the day. And I guess I'm glad that I didn't get a chance to do it, because then we really would have been out of date. So instead, coming to you in the evening before, Tuesday evening for reals, as we find out the news that the Iranians have struck back for the assassination of their General Soleimani in the form of a ballistic missile attack of some kind. I'm not entirely certain which missiles were used, but launched from Iranian territory into Iraq, hitting an Air Force base, an air base that I guess is in joint use by the Iraqi forces and American forces. Al-Assad Air Force Base. If we had our druthers, I would think you would not want to name a base Al-Assad, really, with Syria raging just to the north, of course. But it's not up to us. And it may be, I'm sure it's named after, well, I don't know. I'm guessing it's named after the area, the geographic region, perhaps, that the base is in, and not the Al-Assad family. I assume that the Al-Assad family was probably named for that region at some point. Or maybe not. Maybe Al-Assad means something in Arabic that I have no idea. And we'll either never learn or we'll have corrected by one of you out there in the audience who's familiar with the terminology. But it struck me just interesting. Oh, really? Al-Assad Air Force Base. I wonder who we could petition about changing that. I'll have to just grab up the news about it and repeat it to you. By this time, of course, I have no doubt that you have learned considerably more, but the news as of what we'll call last night was, reported here from CNN. Iran attacks two Iraqi air bases, or two bases anyway, housing U.S. forces in revenge for Soleimani's death. And the reporting goes like this. Iran launched more than a dozen missiles at two Iraqi bases that hold U.S. troops in what appears to be retaliation for the American airstrike that killed a top Iranian general last week, the Pentagon said Tuesday, confronting President Donald Trump with the biggest test of his presidency to date, which is really kind of amazing that we've made it this far. An U.S. official told CNN that there were no initial reports of any U.S. casualties, which is contrary to the rather more panicked reports that I had seen earlier that some 20 service members had been killed. Later on, revised to maybe it might be Iraqi service members who were killed, and I guess here the story is that it's still not clear what kind of casualties there were, at least according to this piece that was filed not all that long ago, at least updated not all that long ago when I'm reading it. Let's continue on. U.S. officials say no initial reports of any U.S. casualties, but an assessment of the impact of the strikes is underway. There are casualties among the Iraqis at Ain al-Assad Air Base following the attack, an Iraqi security source tells CNN. The number of casualties and whether the individuals were killed or wounded was not immediately clear. They probably know, but they're not telling us. White House aides had initially made plans for a possible address to the nation by Trump, but thankfully that didn't happen. This according to two officials, but a White House official said that Trump would not speak on Tuesday. Amazing. We got a real break on that one. The attack comes days after the U.S. killed top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in an airstrike in the Iraqi capital of Baghdad. The administration has sought to cast that strike as an attempt to de-escalate tensions with Iran, but the world was able to see through that one. But it does say here, but Tehran has vowed revenge for the killing, which it says was an act of war and state terrorism. You could debate with them over the state terrorism, but it would only be a debate. I don't know that you would come away the clear winner in that one. Interesting setup, though, by CNN. The administration has sought to cast that strike as an attempt to de-escalate, but that's ridiculous, and we don't believe it here at CNN. But, they can't say that. Well, they can. They won't, is what you know. All right. In a statement, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, an elite wing of the Iranian military that is also known as the IRGC, I guess among English speakers anyway, that's the acronym for it, said the attacks were hard revenge for the death of Soleimani. The IRGC said in the statement that any country housing U.S. troops could be subject to hostile and aggressive acts. I think that's code for Saudi Arabia. I think first time around Gulf War situation, the story was that troops anywhere in the Islamic world were subject to attack, and then from there was born the Al-Qaeda resistance that developed among the jihadi fighters then training in Afghanistan under Osama bin Laden. That was kind of what radicalized him for his anti-American activities anyway. So there we sit, waiting for that to happen. To the great Satan, they say, we warn that if you repeat your wickedness or take any additional movements or make additional aggression, we will respond with more painful and crushing responses, the statement to the U.S. read. Jonathan Hoffman, a Pentagon spokesperson, said Tuesday evening that Iran launched more than a dozen missiles at the Al-Assad air base, which houses U.S. troops and American and coalition forces in the town of Erbil. Hoping I'll get that pronunciation at least close to correct, E-R-B-I-L. Hoffman said the Pentagon is assessing the damage done by the attacks. In recent days and in response to Iranian threats and actions, the Department of Defense has taken all appropriate measures to safeguard our personnel and partners, Hoffman said in a statement. These bases have been on high alert due to indications that the Iranian regime planned to attack our forces. Gee whiz, I wonder why they would do that. And our interests in the region. As we evaluate the situation and our response, we will take all necessary measures to protect and defend U.S. personnel, partners, and allies in the region. Okay. At least 2 ballistic missiles hit separate areas in Erbil, 2 Kurdish security officials tell CNN. One missile landed inside the perimeter of Erbil International Airport without exploding. Shoo, wow. The second missile hit an area roughly 20 miles west of Erbil without causing casualties. Amazing. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Army General Mark Milley arrived at the White House following the attack, and they left later Tuesday night. I saw some folks on Twitter observing that must mean, I think Hunter was actually observing, it must mean that there was no strike coming tonight because there's no chance that those warmonger idiots would pass up the chance to watch the bombing in the Situation Room if the opportunity were available. But they must have told them, no boom boom explosions tonight. Everybody goes home. And that was the end of the evening there. Maybe. We'll see whether that really... We'll see what happens, I guess. Let's see. More here. Katri al-Obaidi. That was my best stab at that name. A commander in the nearby town of al-Baghdadi said that the shelling has stopped for now. Trump visited the base in December of 2018 to visit troops after Christmas. Vice President Mike Pence also visited the base in November of 2019. The attack follows last week's deadly U.S. drone strike that Trump ordered to kill Soleimani. On from here, I think we got what we need out of this thing. I think the next section is Iran claims responsibility. What more do you want to know about that? Are there any interesting... Oh, well, there's mention of the chest-thumping quote from Esper. The attack came hours after Esper told CNN that the U.S. is not seeking a war with Iran, but is, quote, prepared to finish one. Grr, so tough. Well, okay. There are a number of ways to finish a war, of course. One's by winning, but there's another choice. Anyway, let's see. Anything else that we want to pick up on? The next section is called Attacks Are a Direct Challenge to Trump. I guess so. Not really I'm puzzled a little bit about what I think the Iranians are most likely to do. I did happen to see in my Twitter travels yesterday, and I think I may have pocketed this information somewhere along the line, but I believe the Iranians had at some point insisted that they too had compiled a list of targets that they might consider going after, and that list might in fact include Trump properties, although now I can't see that I've put this aside anywhere. I'm curious about where that might have disappeared to. But it wouldn't surprise me if that were the case, if only to essentially troll Trump and the United States. I did see that when Trump made one of his various threatening tweets yesterday, he followed it up with a picture of an American flag, just tweeted an American flag, but really a very low quality computer generated computer graphic art of a flag, not a nice photo or something of an American flag. But anyway, clip art, essentially. And I think the Iranians trolled right back after the attack had been launched and the news began to break of what had happened. Somebody on the Iranian side apparently tweeted out a picture of an Iranian flag because they have those too. And I guess that was supposed to tell us that we understand that your president is a child and he has no chance of coming out on top in this one. But we'll see what happens. There's an awful lot that can still go on, but cross our fingers and wait this one out. I guess it will have to wait for morning for the sundowning president to make his decision about how to, or if to respond, and whether to go on television and make a statement of some kind. I applaud the choice, or whoever guided the choice, to say, yeah, he's in no condition to stay up late and do this. It's possible that nothing changes, but we might just get a better outcome if we put him to bed and wake him up and give him breakfast and see if we can do better in the morning. All right. Much else going on, of course, in this situation and elsewhere and peripheral to these situations and to the impeachment situation. I didn't get to a discussion on Monday when we could have brought this up, but I guess we'll, at this point, maybe make at least short mention for the record of the stories and reporting from the Daily Beast. If I can find it as I scroll around, there's an awful lot that's new to the Pocket folder here. Here it is. I guess they were first out with the news that patrons at Pervalago were saying that Trump spent the weekend prior to the attack and really from New Year's on walking around, bumbling around at Pervalago telling people, hey, you hear what's going to happen to Iran? Something big fireworks going to happen in Iran. Keep your eye on Iran. Going to do something bold and decisive. And they've illustrated the piece here with this. I imagine they've pieced this together. I mean, it's obviously a photo montage. They got this picture of Trump doing the backhanded whisper thing out of the side of his mouth. I'm sure that's not exactly how he was spotted walking around in Mar-a-Lago, but you get the idea. So the exclusive report here, put together by Spencer Ackerman, Asoin Subsang, who continue to murder the poor guy's names. Maybe I can look that up. I think he's ever been interviewed on TV where someone else pronounces his name aloud. So check it out. Note to self. It means it's never going to get done. That's a note to self means I know I should do this, but I'll never will. Erin Banco as well, and Betsy Swan chiming in on this one. In the 5 days prior to launching a strike that killed Iran's most important military leader, Donald Trump roamed the halls of Mar-a-Lago, his private resort in Florida, and started dropping hints to close associates and clubgoers that something huge was coming. They just say huge, but you know how he pronounces the word. Although I haven't heard him do that lately. According to 3 people who've been at the president's Palm Beach club over the past several days, Trump began telling friends and allies hanging at his perennial vacation getaway that he was working on a big response to the Iranian regime. What response to what? I don't know. That they would be hearing or reading about very soon. 2 weeks, 2 days. His comments went beyond the New Year's Eve tweet he sent out warning of the big price Iran would pay for damage to U.S. facilities. 2 of these sources tell the Daily Beast that the president specifically mentioned he'd been in close contact with his top national security and military advisors on gaming out options for an aggressive action that could quickly materialize. He kept saying, "You'll see," one of the sources recalled, describing a conversation with Trump days before Thursday's strike. By the way, I think by Friday, was it Friday or was it Monday that we were discounting, I guess it's probably Friday, discounting the possibility that Eric Trump's strangely bellicose tweet of the day earlier could possibly really have been referring to the Iran attack and that it was instead supposed to be attributed to something else that had happened. And I don't know, at the time, I think we had in mind. Oh, yes, right. Reinforcements arriving at the embassy in Baghdad, which at that point was under siege by protesters. So the excuse was he was really talking about that. And everybody backed off of accusing Trump of having told his family members about these attacks before they happened. And now, afterwards, we find out, well, he was roaming around Mar-a-Lago telling people. So are we sure that we're not back on for the Eric Trump rumor? I don't know. I haven't seen that addressed again since. But I guess that's a live controversy again because Trump's big mouth. All right, back to the article here. Trump's gossipy whispers regarding a big response in Iraq foreshadowed what was to come. After hours of silence, senior officials in the Trump administration argued that what had taken place in Iraq was not an act of aggression. Instead, they both publicly and behind closed doors on the Hill said there that killing Qasem Soleimani was designed, quote, to advance the cause of peace, as U.S. Special Envoy for Iran Brian Hook put it in a Friday interview. I knew Captain Hook would get us in some trouble eventually. Advance the cause of peace with murder. Those Mar-a-Lago guests received more warning about Thursday's attack than Senate staff did, and about as much clarity. A classified briefing on Friday, the first the administration gave to the Hill, featured broad claims about what the Iranians were planning and little evidence of planning to bring about the de-escalation the administration says it wants. According to 3 sources either in the room or told about the discussion, briefers from the State Department, Pentagon, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence claimed that killing Soleimani was designed to block Iranian plans to kill hundreds or even thousands of Americans in the Mideast. That would be a massive escalation from the recent attack patterns of Iran and its regional proxies, who tend to kill Americans in small numbers at a time. It's not good, but it's small. This administration has absolutely not earned the benefit of the doubt when it makes these kinds of claims. When you're taking action that could lead to a third American war in the Middle East in 20 years, you need to do better than these kinds of assertions, said a Senate aide in the room. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has also said publicly that the Iranians plan to kill hundreds of Americans before Soleimani's killing. Nor, said 4 sources who requested anonymity to discuss a classified briefing, nor did the briefers provide detail on a key question surrounding an act of war against a regional power. What next? Administration representatives didn't provide specifics. Instead, they reiterated that the U.S. seeks to de-escalate tensions with Iran after killing one of its top military officials, a major emphasis for Pompeo in his calls to foreign dignitaries on Friday. How the Trump administration plans to do that remains unknown, particularly now that the Pentagon confirmed the 82nd Airborne's Immediate Response Force Brigade will deploy to Kuwait, constantly on deployment to those Gulf states, those Gulf client states. Administration officials provided instead a vague expression of wanting to de-escalate, but no clarity on what de-escalatory steps look like, according to the Senate aide. To talk about de-escalation now is absurd in a way because Iran will react, said Rob Malley, a senior Mideast official in the Obama White House. The de-escalation decision should have been taken before the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. Iranian officials on Friday threatened the U.S. with a military response following the killing of Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, the leader of the Iranian-backed Popular Mobilization Unit's militia in Iraq. It remains unclear exactly how Tehran will strike back, but current and former U.S. and Iraqi officials say Iran has a range of options at its disposal. We've now seen what one of them apparently is. And Tehran's ability to strike doesn't depend on Soleimani to lead the Quds force, sources say, and I don't know why anyone would think it would. Soleimani was a bad guy, but it's not like the Quds force depended on him to operate, said Jarrett Blank, a former State Department official who worked on Iran policy. The idea that the Quds force had attacks in the works and now it doesn't because he's dead is obviously false. It's not clear why killing Soleimani changes the threat profile, although it's neither is it clear by any means that the attack on Tuesday night was directed or involved in any way the Quds force, which, as I understand it, are those who are operating outside of Iranian territory, and this attack was launched from inside, but who knows? On Friday, the Trump administration continued to portray the killing of a military commander of a country the U.S. is formally not at war with as an act that would lead to peace. They're very skeptical of the Daily Beast, and I think rightly so. In an interview with BBC Radio, State Department official Brian Hook, there he is again, said the strike was a very necessary thing to do. And from a podium in Florida, Trump said the U.S. took action last night to stop a war. He said, "We did not take action to start a war." So when they say he was at a podium in Florida, he means the disco room at Pervalago, which was converted to look like a real, actual, professional presidential briefing room. Blue curtains, etc., etc. But we've seen him boogieing down with Jeffrey Epstein there, and the who was it? I don't know. It was the Miami Dolphins cheerleaders, or maybe some of the out-of-town cheerleaders in town. I'm in town to play the Dolphins, you dumbass. And here's the cheerleaders are with us. Always has to be a movie reference in order to keep the mood light in the middle of World War III. Continuing on with the piece here, Vice President Mike Pence falsely suggested Iran was behind 9/11. That's great for de-escalation as well. Pence tweeted that Soleimani, you see this one? Soleimani and his Quds force, quote, assisted in the clandestine travel to Afghanistan of 10 of the 12 terrorists who carried out the September 11th terrorist attacks in the United States. Well, thankfully, the answer to that is right here in the article. I don't have to go into an explanation. Not only were there 19 attackers, not 12, but an incredulous ex-CIA counterterrorism analyst wearily noted that it sounds like he's directly tying Soleimani to 9/11. The 9/11 Commission, as a different ex-CIA analyst tweeted, found that Iran had no advanced knowledge of the attacks. According to two sources familiar with the Senate briefing, another item of discussion was the prospect of Iraqi parliamentarians forcing the U.S. to withdraw, something they did in 2011 against the desires of a previous administration. But that isn't the only major decision Iraqis have to take in the wake of the Soleimani and Muhandis killings. An Iraqi official, speaking on background, told the Daily Beast that the strike on Thursday seriously complicates the already arduous process of forming a new government after mass protests forced U.S.-backed Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi to resign in November. Abdul Mahdi currently acts as caretaker PM. At the very least, it furthers divisions in the country and raises the political temperature, the Iraqi official said. We need de-escalation, and this is the mother of all escalations. Remember that terminology? The mother of all. Back at the Pentagon, spokeswoman Alyssa Farah portrayed the Soleimani killing as an opportunity. Always an opportunity. An opportunity for Iran to turn from its terrorist past and cease its unlawful, aggressive, escalatory attacks. In a statement summarizing the Senate briefing and a companion one in the House, Farah said the administration briefers made the point that we do not seek escalation with Iran, and we have taken appropriate measures to ensure the safety and security of U.S. citizens, forces, partners, and interests in the region. They also reinforced our commitment to allies and partners in the region. Iran may have other plans, and we did see last night, or what is last night now, what one of those plans was Ali Qaderi, a hawkish former U.S. advisor in Iraq, expected the Quds force to aim to assassinate either a CIA station chief or an American flag officer somewhere in the region. That's actually the end of the article. Thankfully, we didn't see that play develop last night. And I don't know whether that's, it's hard to commend anybody for restraint in the middle of all this. But it's a lot better than taking a pot shot like that in the middle of a hot war. Okay, let's say if we can't make sure that all the volumes on the various alarms are turned down so that we don't have that problem next time our alarm goes off, warning us, of course, of the upcoming 2-minute break. So we're about to head into that. But I'm glad to get that background story out there. It does raise some more questions to which we do not yet have answers. So on Monday, we found out that Trump had spent the weekend of the days prior blabbing to everyone at Mar-a-Lago. What I haven't seen so far, though, is any reports of who was listening to that. Because, remember, anytime he's saying anything out loud in Mar-a-Lago, the odds that China is hearing it, that Russia is hearing it, and frankly, that even that Iran was hearing it, are way too high to risk that again, though I did have some people push back. If Iran heard it, how did this happen? Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Doing the Kagro in the Morning Show at night. Once again, just letting you know that pre-recorded, so in case the war escalates to the nuclear level, from 9 to 11 a.m. tomorrow. 1, it's not my fault, and 2, I just couldn't get you that news on a live as we tape basis. So, all right. Yes, so I had some pushback, as I was saying on my way out during the first break, that and a reasonable one. I enjoyed this conversation. Well, now I know it's in fashion. This person, I guess, implied because he didn't say so directly, but it's in fashion to muse aloud about who's got listening devices or spies or both in Mar-a-Lago to be able to pick up on hints that Trump might be dropping. And if it was the case, therefore, that the Iranians were among them, well, then wouldn't they have been able to prevent this attack from happening? And I suppose it depends on a number of things. The lowest level of which would be maybe Trump was saying too much, but I don't think anybody has said that he was spilling the beans outright. It wasn't telling people what the plans were, just that you should look to see something spectacular, some sort of having to do with Iran in the days to come. and again, in all likelihood, if this plan were really known and in the offing, and it's not entirely clear that it was known to be in the offing by the military advisors, because it sounds like, as we discussed yesterday, it sounds like they only offered that plan up as a throwaway that they didn't think he would opt for. So they may never have known early on in the process whether that was ever going to happen. But they also might have kept from him that this thing was going to be an option that was presented to him because they might be afraid he might blurt it out somewhere. I guess the other thing, the more high level, more complicated conspiracy type theory that could explain it, if the Iranians were to get a hold of this intelligence and it was specific enough to do something with, it is possible. Remember that the Quds force operates outside of Iran, and presumably the intelligence agents who process what's overheard in Mar-a-Lago are working inside Iran. I guess presumably perhaps in the capital, in Tehran, but who knows where they may base their operations. I don't know what the logistics of Iranian military intelligence are. I can't even guess. But somebody else besides Soleimani and the forces directly under his control are presumably the ones intercepting and or interpreting that kind of intelligence. And it may be that there are interbranch rivalries there, or factional warfare inside of the Iranian military forces, and maybe some rivalries. I don't know if anything rises to that level, but I do understand that Soleimani had something of a reputation as an up and comer in the power structure among the civilian population of Iran, and that could be something that others might be jealous of, and just might be the story based on nothing, just total speculation. But sometimes you want to hold those things out as a possibility, so you can game out what you're dealing with the Iranians. It may very well be that if that information had gotten into the hands of Iranian military intelligence, that might have gotten into the hands of somebody with some jealousies who might not be terribly interested in warning General Soleimani of an impending attack, especially if he thought, well, it will be executed by the Trump administration. There's a 50-50 chance that they blow themselves up accidentally on the way and are never able to execute this thing at all. So we don't really know. But more likely, I think there just wasn't any actionable intelligence, which I guess is a good thing. But the other complaint about Trump's blabbing around Mar-a-Lago was that people were noting an odd spike in the share prices of some of the big defense contractors. Lockheed Martin, I know, was mentioned. I don't know whether Raytheon got mentioned or not, but of course our current Secretary of Defense is an ex-Raytheon lobbyist, so maybe it's possible. I'd love to see that investigated. I think it would be very interesting. I don't know whether, I have the feeling that there are some real dopes hanging around at Mar-a-Lago who just might not understand that that would be a really easily detectable insider trading issue, and that the SEC could probably nail that down in a couple of hours. So I don't know. I suppose if we never hear anything about it, the answer might be that either it didn't happen that way, or it's not traceable to what went on at Mar-a-Lago, or Trump has threatened to assassinate everybody at the SEC. I guess that's also a possibility, but we'll leave that one for last. Why? I don't know. There might not be a rational basis for leaving it for last. I'm just saying that's what we're doing. Okay. Let's see. So, lots more to guess about. Oh, another interesting question. I'll have to make, again, note to self to look for the, I did want to look for that tweet about, what was it? About, now I've already lost this this train of thought about, yes, whether or not there was a list of Trump properties that was targeted. I'm pretty sure I saw it in a tweet, but I don't know if I can remember enough of the text to be able to dig the thing up from out of the ether. But it also started me wondering about just how far do we think Trump would push us to use either troops or defense money or like security grants or something to shore up the security at Trump properties, both at home and around the world. This is sort of an interesting theoretical question. If the Iranians did make such a threat, if we believed it, wouldn't Trump then be, he'd be justified in personally coming to the conclusion that he should worry about the security of his properties. What would be only questionable in terms of justification is, would it be proper for the United States to expend large amounts of money or lives defending the Trump properties around the world? Or was this what he was looking for all along? I mean, even if I'm assuming that he still thinks that the best possible outcome is that there aren't any attacks on Trump properties, but that he can play off of the threat to Trump properties to, one, spend federal money there that he can pocket some of it, or two, dispatch troops, which make good props. Now, you might think having troops stationed around a Trump property would make people nervous and not want to stay there. But remember, his supporters who are wealthy enough to stay there are also very, very dumb and might actually get some sort of weird tingle up their leg about seeing troops there, especially if the Trump organization, and I suspect that they would go right to this, is inclined to advertise that, because these properties belong to the President of the United States and because the President knows that he's a threat, he brooks no threats from terrorists and he won't allow it to happen. He has put the U.S. Army here to protect our guests, and Trump properties are among the safest in the world because billions are being spent to shore up their security, and our finest men and women in uniform are here to guard you. And I think that would probably work with their demographic. Stationing troops in a place costs money, and to offset that, I guess we would see something like here. It's a public-private partnership here. Well, the Trump organization will split the bill or foot some of the bill for stationing additional troops there. Yes, right? It's only fair after all. And that makes him sound like he's pitching in to help with this stuff. But in the meantime, what if he's also applying for grants from the federal government to help cover some of those costs? Because after all, how could we be expected to pay? These are private businesses and I don't run them and my sons do. And you can't expect them to foot the bill for everything, and it's just not fair. And that's why we gave them $2 billion in grant money. And guess what? The check to the federal government to help pay for it is a little late. And besides which, we're never going to show it to you anyway. So which means we don't have to write it, which means we get to keep it, which means we don't pay it, which means we're cheating you. I don't know that it's happening, but I don't know that it's not happening. And it'll never be provable that it, one way or the other, quite honestly, unless they're actually stupid enough to do all this stuff out in the open. And, so far they have been, actually, for a number of the scandals they've been wrapped up in. So maybe it's not impossible that we begin to see this stuff happening. Who knows? Maybe they'll actually make it a selling point. I guess it can see not only, of course, the security of the facilities being guarded by troops and getting all these grants, but that it's somehow extra patriotic for these for the responsible cabinet secretaries making these grants. And of course, they may be saying, well, we weren't favoring the president's properties. We were simply doing this on a meritorious basis. The highest priority targets were going to get the money. It wasn't based on the fact that the president owned them. Of course, they became targets because the president owned them, but that wasn't up to us. The Iranians chose the targets. We just compensated with grant money. You could see how they would try to split that hair. Whew. Anyway, I assume that that's already in the works and that they're using that to steal money next. But let's see. Other items that we should probably discuss that percolate around this area and how Trump uses these things to steal money. Let's jump back into Pocket for a second and take a look at what's there and some of the other items that I've saved from other sources. Trying to decide where we go in terms of segue from this. There was a lot of talk about the decision-making process of how Trump decided to take this shot at Soleimani, but I think we got to the key stuff yesterday, especially when we were able to share Dante Atkins' commentary on filling us in on what it ordinarily would take to get an option like this, even a very, very dumb option like this, into a presentation that was going to the president. In order to get it included in the options that are listed, there's a whole process that you're supposed to go through, and the process is supposed to include thinking through all of the possible ramifications of what you're doing. And that's the accountability part of it, and preparedness part. Like, you can't just wing it and put it in there because, one, you want to be prepared for things, but two, you also are supposed to be on record and defend this thing all the way up the food chain, as they say. And if you're not doing that, you're skipping the hard work and skipping out on steps that are likely, ordinarily, I think, to filter out the really bad ideas and to make them stick out from among the options when lower level folks are vetting things for inclusion in a presentation for the president, thereby filtering out the worst stuff and making sure it never rises to the level where the president sees it. And if they've skipped that, there should be hell to pay for that. But who knows what the appetite for opening new investigations is on Capitol Hill. And maybe that will be our segue off to impeachment land, where we're finding out on Tuesday evening and heading into Wednesday that there are reports emerging that McConnell has secured, though it's not clear whether he's going to call on these people, but has secured his necessary 51 votes to go ahead with the Senate trial without witnesses as originally planned. I have reports from both The Hill and Politico on that front. And let's see, why don't I open the Politico piece and use that one to kick things off. McConnell ready to start impeachment trial with partisan power play. I kind of like that headline. GOP leaders have enough votes to ignore Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's demands for witnesses and new evidence. That's a reporting of Burgess Everett and Marianne Levine in the Tuesday afternoon edition of Politico. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is moving forward on a set of impeachment trial rules without Democratic support. The Kentucky Republican said Tuesday that he has locked down sufficient backing from his 53-member caucus to pass a blueprint for the trial that leaves the question of seeking witnesses and documents until after opening arguments are made. That framework supposedly would mirror the contours, I'm going to throw in supposedly on that, mirror the contours of President Bill Clinton's trial and ignore Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's demands for witnesses and new evidence at the outset. We have the votes, once the impeachment trial has begun, to pass a resolution essentially the same, very similar, to the 100-0 vote in the Clinton trial, McConnell told reporters. All we're doing here is saying we're going to get started in exactly the same way that 100 senators agreed to 20 years ago, which doesn't say very much. I know he wants to hammer home that it was a 100-0 vote 20 years ago, but it was 20 years ago. It was on a very different kind of impeachment, although the outcome seemed similarly determined at the beginning. It really was sort of a different atmosphere then, and really, who cares how many votes something similar but for a different situation than we're facing today got 20 years ago. He just wants to repeat that it was 100-0, but that's neither here nor there. The GOP leader added that the Senate will, quote, get around to the discussion of witnesses, but not before the Senate trial begins. Keeping in mind here some of the more important facts about why it was arranged that way last time and why that wouldn't apply this time is that there weren't any witnesses called by the House last time who didn't show. The president, in that case Bill Clinton, was interviewed directly by the independent counsel investigating the situation. And here Trump had refused requests for a live interview, had, I think, agreed to answer written questions, but even apparently was provably giving false answers in his written responses as well, but never sat down for a face-to-face interview. And several of the witnesses and eventually, again, in the Clinton trial, there was additional testimony heard from witnesses during the Senate procedure that weren't heard from in their entirety during the House procedure. But they although they weren't live witnesses, they were videotaped depositions that were presented for the first time in the Senate trial. And here they're just simply saying there will be no new information presented here. Marco Rubio went as far as tweeting that, in his opinion, that he doesn't go ahead and say so, but I guess what he was trying to get at was that instead of considering the House to be a grand jury and the Senate to be the trial stage petty jury that would try a case, that the analogy he was drawing was that the trial actually took place in the House and that the Senate is essentially acting as some sort of an appeals court, so that there wouldn't be any new information entered into the record. It would simply be a pure law review of the record as developed in the House. But one, that's not an analogy that anybody's ever made for this situation, and it doesn't really apply. And two, of course, a lot of this testimony was sought by the House, but refused to the House by the White House, claiming all sorts of outlandish immunities and privileges, to the tests of which they have subsequently lost in court. We also now have, of course, the complicating factor of John Bolton saying that he would be willing to testify in the Senate trial if he were subpoenaed by the Senate to do so, which is an interesting development all by itself. Perhaps we pause at this point with the Politico reading. We already have, as a matter of fact, but discuss John Bolton just a little bit. I know there was a lot of excitement initially about that, and then a lot of questions that followed immediately, like, why did you say you would be willing to testify in the Senate? Is that just because the House process, in your opinion, or someone else's opinion perhaps, is over and there won't be an opportunity to present to them, and so the next hot spot is the Senate, so I'll just go there? Or is it more sinister? Is there parsing going on? Is it simply the fact that, well, sure, I'd be willing to testify if subpoenaed in the Senate, knowing that the chances that a majority Republican Senate would simply refuse to authorize such a subpoena on behalf of the Senate means that he would never have to live up to the terms of this offer he was making. Or could it be something worse? I mean, it could be something worse. But even that alone is problematic because, of course, the offer is supposed to be, well, of course I would testify because that would be my obligation to testify because I'm a patriotic American, or whatever the hell the excuse might be at this stage of the game. But he would be willing to testify if the Senate asked, but the Senate's never going to ask. Well, okay, what about this? If you're willing to testify to the Senate, why wouldn't you testify to the House? Now, it's the question of why he didn't testify to the House the first time around is that the excuse was, well, I'm waiting for the outcome of Don McGahn's case and the, what was it, Cooperman case, in order to determine what course of action I'm going to take. And then the House sort of weirdly decided to dismiss its subpoena against him and ask that the case against him seeking to enforce that subpoena therefore be dismissed. And I can't recall exactly what what we decided the strategy was there, but he too was in court for this, but they dismissed that case and dropped that subpoena. At the time, again, he said that he was waiting for the outcome of the case to determine what he was going to do with the House subpoena. And once it was dropped, I guess he was saved from making that decision. But I guess the basic question, why would somebody be willing to say they would testify to the Senate but not the House? One reason is because he knows that the Senate isn't going to issue that subpoena. The other possibility is essentially that he's saying, well, if Republicans subpoena me, I will agree to honor a subpoena. But if Democrats issue a subpoena, I won't honor that. That doesn't make any sense, and it wouldn't stand up in court, but I don't know that that's something he's particularly worried about at this juncture. That could just mean, well, look, that's my position, and it's indefensible, but that doesn't mean that it will be instantly rejected. What would happen, of course, is the House would end up having to go back to court to say that's an illogical stance. It doesn't make any sense. And, of course, the court won't be interested in what he said he would do for the Senate, although that might make for interesting evidence in any trial of whether or not he should be on the hook for testifying to the House. But it won't prove anything. But you won't need to prove too much. Everyone would expect that the courts would, I think, rightly come back with the decision. Yeah, the House issues you a subpoena. It's a valid subpoena. You have to honor it, whether you like Democrats or not. At which point, we would see what would happen. First, Bolton could, just like everybody else, appeal immediately to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and they'll take it up. But it takes an extra month to get through that, even if it's expedited. And then the Court of Appeals says, yeah, just like we did with the prior cases that are exactly like yours, we say, no, you have to testify. And maybe he appeals that to the Supreme Court. We don't know how that goes, so we'll see how other appeals of other cases go, and whether the Supreme Court, in partisan fashion, because it can find 4 partisan votes, says we want to review the case, even though there's nothing for them to review, but they may say it anyway because no one can stop them. And this can go on forever. We've outlined how they can threaten this in other cases, in identical cases to this one. Suppose they get all the way to the Supreme Court, and with the Don McGahn case, and the Supreme Court says, yeah, we were just looking to waste time. We agreed to take the case, but it's now 9-0, or they split 5-4. And let's say the court says you got to testify. At which point John Bolton says, well, I'm not gonna. And you say, well, you have to because Don McGahn had to. And he says, literally, I'm not Don McGahn. you're going to have to issue this order in my name in order to get me to agree to do it. At which point, by the way, I might still just say, you know what, to hell with it. I have a court order that says John Bolton must testify. Screw you. The president pardoned me. Nothing you can do. And there might not be anything you can do. It is said that the founders, of course, contemplated something like this and said, of course, no one would ever have the unmitigated gall to simply pardon someone who was being either held in contempt of court or violating a court order to testify simply because it would benefit the president not to testify, and then have that president absolve him of any wrongdoing and pardon him so that he didn't have to face the consequences of his action, because that would be just too embarrassing. But as we discovered yesterday in reading Ian Millhiser's work, that just doesn't work with Trump and Trumpsters. Now, it's also said that John Bolton has had his final break with Donald Trump and is ready to spill the beans. I don't know if it's really true. But once we're in that area of pardons or justice being ineffectual as against dedicated Trumpsters, let's consider this one other possibility. What if it's the case that, I don't know, let's say the Senate actually goes ahead and says, you know what, we are going to issue a subpoena for John Bolton. We just can't hold out any longer. We're just too damn embarrassed. You got us. Exactly like you said you would. And we're going to issue that subpoena for John Bolton. And John Bolton gets the subpoena and he shows up. And he says, I will honor that subpoena and I will show up in the Senate to testify. And he does testify. But suppose John Bolton decides at the last minute, or was going to do this all along, I am going to lie my ass off. I am going to say that there was no quid pro quo, that the call was perfect, everything Donald Trump had ever dreamed I would say about him. And we have him dead to rights. And he's absolutely, provably lying. What do we do then? Think about that for a minute. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. So did you think about it? Did you think it through for a minute? I really, literally was going to give you a minute to think this through. I am not positive what the answer actually is unless we go down that same road. Suppose John Bolton, or anybody else for that matter, shows up and testifies. And remember, by the way, I think that the Schumer demand at the moment is for administration witnesses to be called. And I think everybody that they named was a White House or executive branch official who had previously been prevented from testifying. And the assumption was that, for one thing, the assumption is we have enough information from the other lower level executive branch people who testified for whatever reason, some because they were brave and some because they thought they could game the system. I don't know. But we should have enough facts on the record that if Bolton or anybody else were to show up and literally just lie like crazy in front of everybody, that you could catch them in that lie. You would be able to prove it logically. Here's the thing. Logic doesn't do me any good in a situation, one, where the president can simply pardon you, or two, where the Senate can simply say, we don't give a damn that he lied his ass off. We saw him do it. We understand. We hear you perfectly. It's absolutely true that other witnesses totally contradicted him. We'll even stipulate that they're right and he's wrong. What are you going to do with this? In court, if you lie your ass off, I suppose, you could have the judge take, judicial notice of that. The prosecutors could ask that you be charged with perjury. And certainly it would be perjury doing this before the Senate as well. The problem is, and I don't know the answer to this one, but for instance, I know that what the case is with contempt of Congress, it requires a referral from one body or another of the Congress to the Justice Department to be prosecuted. So if you want Bolton prosecuted for perjury for admittedly lying his ass off in the Senate trial, you'd need an affirmative vote of the Senate to refer the case to a criminal prosecutor at DOJ. what are the odds that the Senate that was already contemplating passing on having any witnesses whatsoever, finding themselves either shamed or allowing themselves to be thrown into the briar patch or what have you, and then bringing witnesses to bear anyway so that they could trade it for, whether they are successful in trading it for witnesses like Joe Biden or Hunter Biden or anybody else that they could imagine, and hauling them in there and embarrassing them. They maybe do so. Maybe they strike that deal knowing that the witnesses they want to drag in there are going to answer as near to honestly and honorably as possible without, I guess, doing too much damage to themselves. Or maybe they'll be bold and open and transparent through and through. I don't know. Or maybe they'll lie their asses off. I really don't know. But they'll be doing so under penalty of perjury because the Republican Senate, who knows whether they'll just charge them with perjury even if they tell the truth. All it takes is 51 votes to say that's perjury. The DOJ may or may not decline to take the case up from that point. But you'll have a hell of a time getting 51 votes to charge someone who willingly comes and covers up for the president and makes it virtually impossible to convict. It was already impossible to convict Trump in this case anyway. They might even make it virtually impossible for certain Democrats to vote to convict because they just upend the whole case. They do so by lying, but if the Senate won't refer their case to a criminal prosecutor, what's the difference? And even if they do, if the president pardons them, what's the difference? That's something to worry about. I mean, and that's something perhaps more in keeping with what Ian Millhiser was saying yesterday. I wouldn't be surprised if right now, because we're not on the air live, we were missing out on the chance to read Ian Millhiser's next installment in what would become a series for Fox explaining exactly this. But if he does write it, you heard it here first. Remember that. So I think there's a real possibility that John Bolton is looking for an opportunity to, pull out the mat from the rug from beneath all of us and have Democrats fight to get his testimony, only to find out at the last minute that his testimony is a planned series of lies that blows up the prosecution of the case, embarrasses Democrats, and is in no way punishable. Wouldn't that be something? Do we think it's beyond John Bolton? Do we think he's really, really, really mad at Donald Trump and isn't going to do that? Or he's too honorable a guy? I don't know. All of these things could be the case. I just want you to watch out for the worst case scenario because it would really suck. And we'd be stuck trying to figure out how to do anything. I suppose that would be the time to pull out my favorite constitutional law fib of the moment and pretend that we really are ignorant and stupid enough to be reading the Constitution's prohibition against pardoning impeachments, that's supposed to really mean that the president can't issue pardons or that his previously issued pardons become invalid once he is impeached. That is, I don't think there's anybody who seriously reads it that way. But from now on, I do. Wink, wink. I think we've actually hinted at this before, right? Where's my Constitution? Bring me the Constitution. I'm going to wander away from the microphone to go pull up one of several versions, pocket impeachment guides. Yes, pocket constitutions floating around here. Here we are, Article 2, Section 2. On the powers of the presidency. The president shall be commander-in-chief. He loves that one. Blah, blah, blah. Commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy. I shouldn't blah, blah, blah it because that's an issue still in some controversy. So, he shall be the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy and some other things, some more blah, blah, blahs. And then he shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States. We all know about that. Except in cases of impeachment, which I have always assumed anyway. Maybe I'm just wrong about it. I've always assumed that meant, well, you can pardon any offense against the United States except impeachment. if so you can pardon anything you can be charged with in an Article 3 court. But if you are impeached, you can't get out of the impeachment by saying, I hereby pardon myself from out of this impeachment. That's not something you can use a pardon against. You could still presumably pardon yourself for the underlying crime, if any, for which you're being impeached, but it won't save you from being put on trial in the Senate and possibly removed from office. Unless, of course, the rules of the Senate get changed and the Senate doesn't have to try impeachments after all. That's the next section we have to investigate, how that could be warped. But it does lend itself to a stupid kind of Fox News interpretation where you might say, well, the president shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons except in cases of impeachment, meaning except when the president has been impeached. Like, that's a totally different meaning. If you've been impeached, you lose the power to pardon anybody. Or maybe even you lose the pardons you've previously issued might become invalid. Like someone should float the rumor to Eddie Gallagher that you have to go back to military prison. You're back in the brig with you because you didn't get pardoned. You did. You got your reprieve or whatever it was, a commutation of sentence. I can't remember exactly what he was granted in all of this because he's a dirtbag and we don't care. But how about undoing that and saying, I'm sorry, the problem is that the president that did this for you was a moron and he got impeached, and he forgot to tell you that if he gets impeached, that erases all of his... people would probably believe that even without reading the clause, quite honestly. Really, frankly, if you read the clause and you read correctly, I don't see how you could come to this conclusion. But shh, don't tell anybody that. I'm changing my mind. I totally believe the other thing. I don't know. I mean, I thought guns were for well-regulated militias, but that turned out not to be true, even though on its face it seems pretty clear what that was supposed to mean. The Supreme Court has said to hell with it when necessary, so maybe my Supreme Court will say to hell with it in the future. And maybe it can happen later. Right? I don't know. There's nothing in here that says there's any statute of limitations on that. Suppose I ask a newly expanded Supreme Court with 50 democratically appointed members on it and then the original 9 on the side. Do you think this is the way it should go? And they say, sure, because they've all been rated unqualified and they were all 20 years old as well. And long life to them. And we put them on the Supreme Court and they agree with me. Was I wrong? Was I stupid? At that point, I'm a visionary. I should be teaching at Harvard. But instead, I'm here. Which is where I'd prefer to be, quite honestly. It's very cold in Boston, and I just can't fathom going up there. University of Virginia, I'd think about it. It's a long commute. I don't know. So this is the place to be, if you ask me. Anyway, I say we float that. It does seem like the sort of thing that, well, certainly if the shoe were on the other foot somehow, or if it wasn't Eddie Gallagher we were talking about, but I don't know, what's the unpopular, was it Mark Rich? Was that the unpopular guy that was pardoned by Clinton that all the conspiracy theorists think was some, deep, awful thing? I suppose if you tried to float that idea, that guy's pardon didn't hold and had been revoked because Clinton had been impeached, you could probably find 100 people at any Trump rally in 10 minutes who would swear that they believe that and that's what they learned from Schoolhouse Rock. So it is possible. It just, they won't accept it about their people. When the shoe is on the other foot, they won't like it. What was the other clause we wanted to interpret? See, I should have said note to self there, and I didn't do it, and now I can't remember. Yes, right. Oh, yes, there was about the sole power to try impeachments. As you know, of course, the House has the sole power to impeach the president. The Senate is granted the sole power to try impeachments. And I wondered about whether or not we could do bad constitutional interpretation for that one. Now that there's more than one member. Now it's not just Josh Hawley saying maybe we should dismiss the case outright as soon as the papers are delivered to us, or maybe we don't even need the papers anymore. That's what Lindsey Graham is saying. But he too, Lindsey Graham, is thinking, yeah, maybe we should dismiss this thing. And so we'll add this one to the bad constitutional interpretation. What about an idea of saying, well, the only power that the Senate has with respect to impeachments, it shouldn't be read that it is the only body that can try impeachments. That's not the meaning of the sole power of impeachment. What's happening here is the sole power that we, the founders, grant to the Senate with respect to impeachment is to try impeachment cases. Not dismiss them, not ignore them, but to try them. And now, I mean, if you analogize to federal court, I don't think you get away with that. Well, you never get away with that interpretation. But I don't think you get away with that interpretation by analogy, because a case that is dismissed is, I guess, would ordinarily count against you in like, for instance, if a criminal case, double jeopardy. You wouldn't be tried for it again. I think the threshold there is actually the seating of the jury. So I suppose if the case is dismissed before a jury is impaneled, they don't consider you to have faced your first instance of jeopardy, so that you can't invoke double jeopardy. But I guess here you would be talking about having opening arguments being made, and then the Senate jury would vote to dismiss. The jury here has been impaneled, and the proceedings in the case have started. So I don't know that you would ever get a federal court to agree that, yes, a proper analogy here is that dismissal at this stage means the case was never tried. You'd certainly never get them to believe that the only power that the Senate should ever be allowed to exercise with respect to impeachment is to try the case, and no other variant of that will work. But hey, again, what happened to my well-regulated militias? They were disappeared from the Constitution very intentionally and in front of everybody. So, I don't know. I say try anything. Throw anything out there, because that's what the Republicans will be likely to do. And just as I think they'll do this with John Bolton and everybody else whose testimony they want to get, those guys will file appeal after appeal after appeal, and it doesn't matter that it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't matter that there's no possible logical way for Bolton to say and mean that he would testify in front of the Senate but will not honor a House subpoena. It's good logic that his position doesn't make any sense, but screaming that doesn't make any sense out loud doesn't produce a witness. It just foreshadows an argument in front of a court which will agree with you, and which will have its decision appealed, and which appeal will later be appealed, and which could still be defied later on, and which could be fixed by the president with a pardon, as we mentioned. But sound logic is something that will help you once you're in the court, but it only helps the court decide that you were right. It doesn't actually give you the witness. It gives you an order that says the witness should come and should testify, or should expect consequences if he doesn't, but it doesn't produce the witness. And that's the big difference, and that's the shortfall here. Yes, so as I mentioned, Lindsey Graham has got another idea, and his idea is the one we worried about earlier on in the impeachment process. I think well before we got to the articles of impeachment even being written. But I think the question was floated early in the process, early in December, I think. Well, what if they withhold those articles of impeachment? People were already talking about that. And I guess the speculation that I gave then was, well, again, that should paralyze the Senate for the time being, because really, according to law, according to the rules, rather, they have to, and I put that in scare quotes in answering the question on Twitter, they have to wait for the papers to arrive. The articles of impeachment have to be messaged to the Senate before the Senate can do anything about them. And it's pretty universally accepted that that's the case. And so far, the Senate has been willing to abide by that interpretation because they were on recess. They may not be willing to abide by that anymore. And you might find yourself in a scenario like Lindsey Graham now proposes. Let's change the Senate's rules with respect to impeachment such that we don't have to wait for the papers, or that we can come up with some reasoning and say, look, everybody knows what the articles of impeachment are. We shouldn't be bound by sitting here waiting for parchment to show up here. We know what the wording is, and we know what we're going to do with it, and let's just get to it already. Of course, then this was interesting, watching the political press say, but you can't change the Senate rules unless you have 67 votes. Or actually watching other people object that that's the case, even worse, and then watching the political press say, well, sure you can. We all just watched them do it with the nuclear option. It takes 51 votes to change the rules, not 67. Now, that didn't change, by the way. Still takes 67 votes to change the standing rules of the Senate. What you can do with the nuclear option, remember, is that with 51 votes, you can change the interpretation of the existing rules. You can create and sustain a new precedent that has an interpretation of the rules, what they'll call an interpretation of the rules, that stands in complete opposition to the black letter known meaning of the rules, but you can do it. So technically, you're not changing the rules with 51 votes. You're just changing the meaning of the rule, the interpretation of the rule. Can you do it? Yes, you can. I just was bringing back to mind, though, that there was a time not that long ago that the political press, which tuts now and says, we're savvy. You don't need 67 votes. You can't throw that up in our face. We know it only takes 51. Yeah, well, where were you when we were trying to do something good with 51? But they were nowhere. So anyhow, that's not really the central issue. Lindsey Graham, though, now proposing that we can get by that with 51 votes. And they can. And the big LOL moment here, of course, is Lindsey Graham, for those of you who remember what this means, Lindsey Graham was a charter member of the Gang of 14. Does everybody remember what the Gang of 14 was? That was 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats who came together to prevent, supposedly, the Republican Senate in 2005 from invoking the nuclear option to allow them to invoke cloture on judicial appointments that were being held up by filibuster, and invoke that cloture with 51 votes, and so move forward and do what they later swore was practically a satanic ritual when Harry Reid did it in 2013. We never heard of such a thing. Oh my gosh. Anyway, the 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats got together because what they did there was it would have taken 7 Republican defections from the ranks of Republicans in 2005 to prevent then Majority Leader Bill Frist from being able to successfully execute this nuclear option and change the interpretation of the rules and confirm these judges in this way. And likewise, they were met by 7 Democrats who said, well, we will also pledge not to vote in support of filibusters of these judicial nominations unless in extraordinary circumstances. That was left undefined. And so the requisite number of Democrats and the requisite number of Republicans and then a matching number of Democrats. And I can't remember whether the numbers matched there, but maybe they did. But at any rate, it was 7 and 7, and I think it was based largely on the fact that you needed 7 Republicans to say no to the nuclear option in order to defuse that threat. And the reciprocation here was 7 Democrats said, well, we likewise won't support filibusters, and without our 7 votes, we're way under the necessary 40 to sustain that filibuster. Of course, the filibuster is really sustained in the opposite way, but you get the idea. The deal was that no more of this would go on during what was then, I guess, what were we in the 109th Congress, I think, at that time. And Lindsey Graham was a founding member of this group of moderate American statesmen. The Republicans who signed on were largely among the group that billed themselves as moderates. Susan Collins, very few of them still there. Susan Collins was one of them. Lindsey Graham was another. John McCain comes to mind. Of course, he's no longer there. He's dead. But the moderate ranks there, man, I can't even remember if I can name all of them. I mean, are we going back to like Lincoln Chafee was one of them? We should look it up. Maybe I'll grab that for us just to remind us of who they were. I'll have to go to Wikipedia on this one. Gang of 14, Wikipedia. Here we are. Do we have a straight up list here? Yeah, okay. So our Republicans were, remember, get this list. Lincoln Chafee, Susan Collins, Mike DeWine, gone. Lindsey Graham, still there. John McCain, deceased. Olympia Snowe, long gone. And John Warner of Virginia, also long gone. Our Democrats, by the way, Robert Byrd, deceased. Daniel Inouye, who I believe is also deceased. Mary Landrieu, just plain gone. Joe Lieberman, you can hope for it, but he's just gone from Congress. Now, Ben Nelson, Mark Pryor, Ken Salazar. That was the Gang of 14. What a bunch of losers. Now, anyway, still with us from among that group is, what are we down to? Susan Collins, Lindsey Graham. Still in the Senate. I mean, not just still alive. That's it. Down to a gang of two. Both Republicans, and both since exposed, right? Lindsey Graham, now just a total joke. Well, both of them are a total joke. But imagine that an original member of the Gang of 14 pledged to this thing because they were institutionalists opposed on principle to changing the interpretation of the rules to stand them on their heads by a mere 51 votes. They opposed the nature of the procedure, supposedly. Now, in point of fact, I think Lindsey Graham was saying, well, I oppose doing this right now, but I don't dispute the validity of the procedure. Others were more explicit in disputing the procedure itself. But I think he always kept in his back pocket the possibility of coming back, and now it has. And here he is. But what a turnaround, what a turn of events for one of the founding members of the Gang of 14 to say, you know what, we should change the rules, not just of how we handle impeachments, but of how we operate, period. We no longer have to wait for the documentation. We no longer have to wait for the papers to arrive from the House. The bicameralism clause of the Constitution is now declared dead. That's a much bigger step than changing the rules on judicial nominations, and you shouldn't lose sight of that. Okay, I have to interrupt again for a second. As you know, I've admitted already that I am recording the show Tuesday night, so I'm interrupting for what I guess is breaking news on Tuesday night. Who knows what will become clear by the time we air Wednesday morning, but just to make the night that much more ridiculous, apparently a Ukrainian airliner has crashed. That's the most we can say definitively, right near Tehran. I mean, I can't believe the confluence. A Ukrainian airliner and 180 people, I guess, 180 passengers on board, crashes outside of Tehran, and there's, amateur video has been shot. We're talking about a plane that is in flames in the sky before it hits the ground. Speculation that it's been fired upon. It may have been hit by anti-aircraft missiles. I have no idea whose missiles they were. You'll have no idea. Well, you would have had no idea at this point on Tuesday night. By Wednesday, maybe it'll be a better clue. Could it be jumpy Iranians worried about yet more attacks from Americans? Could it be jumpy Americans wary of attacks from Iran? Could it be Iraqis wary of attacks from either side? Could it be Russians taking a pot shot at Ukrainians, hoping that everyone would blame either America or Iran for? I don't know. Maybe you'll know by the time this airs. But as for now, I guess we'll take a 2-minute breather to try and figure out something. I don't think we're going to have any more information for you on today's taped program. We're just going to have to turn around and head back to the nice, quiet topics like the impeachment of a president, the death of the rule of law, the fantastic and growing number of Russian operatives who seem bent on destroying American democracy through Donald Trump. We'll see. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And man, we still continue to be puzzled by this. Like I said, we're going to have to turn around and head back. But boy, talk about your wild cards involved in the region. I mean, I don't know how anybody predicts something like this if it's just an accident. Of course, I guess if it's not an accident, well, I guess anything goes. But this is why you have to enter very carefully into any situation in the Middle East, and you don't head in guns blazing and figure, well, what's the worst that could happen? Because you'll never imagine it. Well, Trump will certainly never imagine it, even if he tries to imagine it beforehand. All right. Let's see. Let me double back to domestically to another story or a thread I wanted to read you from the other day, just to get you up to speed on the legal situation here. Like I say, domestically in the impeachment arena. I have this tweet thread from January 3rd from Glenn Kirshner. We've called out on Glenn's name before. He's an NBC News legal analyst, and he was on the 3rd following arguments in the D.C. Court of Appeals in the McGahn case, which I believe we mentioned earlier in the show with respect to what's Bolton going to do, and he was waiting for the outcome of McGahn and Kupperman's case and was somehow tying his fate to them, and now has been untethered from all of that apparently. But here's what's up with McGahn. As of last Friday, Glenn Kirshner tweeting out here, today's D.C. Federal Court of Appeals arguments were interesting and somewhat predictable. And here's his quick rundown of what was argued before the appeals court on Friday. The first case involved McGahn's claim of absolute immunity, basically saying he is completely beyond the reach of congressional subpoenas. Of course, as we know, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson ruled against McGahn at the district court level, and today's argument was his appeal of that ruling. Cutting right to the chase, if I'm reading the judges right, McGahn will very likely lose again. It was cloudy and stormy day in D.C., and the dark clouds, he says, seemed to follow McGahn's attorney into the courtroom and hover over the entirety of his argument. He tried to convince the judges, I guess, that the courts do not have the authority to decide this issue, both because the House doesn't have standing, a legally cognizable dog in the fight is how he briefly defined standing. We've been over the concept, of course. So they basically said that this court shouldn't even take this up. You don't have jurisdiction, both because the House doesn't have standing to sue, which is odd, and or because it's a political question, and the political question doctrine would ordinarily push the courts to opt to stay out of settling the question. The most ridiculous argument McGahn's lawyer made, Glenn says, was that there are political remedies that Congress can use to put pressure on the administration that could force McGahn to testify. That, I think we're beyond those things. But the remedies discussed are things like withholding appropriations, passing punitive legislation, or, he says, get ready for it. Ready for this one? Refusing to vote on judicial nominations. Wow. What do you know? That, of course, not likely to happen. And, of course, an awfully stupid argument to make. I mean, the House is the party here. The House doesn't vote on judicial nominations. I don't think he even mentions that unless, I mean, the fact that he expresses this as get ready for it, refusing to vote on judicial nominations, and 1, 2, 3 exclamation points before then saying, please. But I guess he's caught on to it. But, I mean, how stupid is that? The Senate does that. And, of course, you can't even really withhold consent on that through the filibuster anymore. You're just powerless in all of that. Anyway, this argument, of course, Glenn continues, presupposes that the Republicans in Congress have some minimal separation from the administration or some minimal integrity. Judge Rogers quickly dismissed that argument, saying to McGahn's lawyer, you're listing remedies that require cooperation between parties and between houses of Congress. There's the offhand mention, the oblique mention of the problem. She highlighted the frivolity of McGahn's political remedies argument by saying that it takes two for those viable remedies. In short, McGahn's argument ignored context and was divorced from reality. The House lawyer, Megan Barbero, did an excellent job laying out why McGahn's testimony is relevant as to the 2 articles of impeachment already passed, that is, to show a pattern of Trump misconduct, and to possible articles of impeachment, I guess, yet to come. On a disheartening note, when the judges pressed McGahn's attorney, it's disheartening, but you'll see it coming. Are you ready? We've discussed it. When the judges pressed McGahn's attorney on what McGahn would do if both the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court ruled that he has no absolute immunity and must testify, okay, he's now lost at the Supreme Court on the claim of absolute immunity. And here's the funny thing. I told you what he would do, and I don't know if you believed it or not. But you know what? Most other people just don't. They think I'm, just such a pessimist. Or as what did Glenn Greenwald once said? It was, right. I'm imagining cartoon supervillains out there who just don't believe that something as weak and I don't remember exactly how he put it, but as weak and powerless as a Supreme Court ruling could possibly stop a supervillain like this. And I guess we've just seen it coming for a long time. So get this. They ask him outright, what do you do then if we say no, there's no such thing as absolute immunity, and so does the Supreme Court? And we all say your client, McGahn, has to testify. The attorney actually answers and says McGahn would go to the congressional hearing as ordered and then start asserting other privileges like executive privilege or attorney-client privilege, even though those claims might be as frivolous as his absolute immunity claim. Everyone would be off to court again to continue running on this seemingly endless legal treadmill that Trump is using to run out the clock. This is no way to run a government. This executive branch is determined to win the war of attrition in an effort to preserve its ability to act criminally and corruptly. More to follow, he says, and we're, I guess, eagerly awaiting that. And maybe it's already out there and I have not seen it, but nothing official from the court. But how do you like that? That's about as clear an illustration of the problem as I could give you. And by the way, as clear an illustration that I've been right all along. Oh my God. Send money, I guess. To tell you that, yeah, McGahn will lose on this and they'll say, look, there's no such thing as absolute immunity. That's ridiculous. And you got to testify. And what he's going to do is he's going to show up and honor the subpoena only to essentially undermine it by then just saying, well, I don't have to testify for another reason. The reason, the court order said I had no right to continue to claim absolute immunity. And I'm not. Now I'm claiming executive privilege. Well, you're not allowed to assert that. That's something that the White House asserts on your behalf. Well, then maybe they'll assert it. Well, they haven't now. How do you know? Have you asked them? We got to go back to court. Well, fine. If that doesn't work, then I just say attorney-client privilege. But you don't have attorney-client privilege. You're the White House attorney. You're not the president's personal attorney here. That doesn't work either. Well, some of it might work. Well, some of it might not. Or maybe none of it will. But yeah, McGahn's only interest, he doesn't care if he looks stupid. He cares about burning more time. And he's gonna, you know what? He's gonna insist that they have to go and relitigate all of this based on, and maybe he'll just assert executive privilege and make them litigate that, and then lose at the district court, and lose at the circuit court of appeals, and lose at the Supreme Court, and then be ordered to show up, this time with a court order, because we're so smart. The court order will say, not only do you have to show up and testify, but you're not allowed to plead absolute immunity, and you're not allowed to plead executive privilege. Okay? Now go. Testify. Shucks. All right. Here I go. I'm complying with the court order. I'm here, and I'm going to answer questions, and I'm not going to plead absolute immunity, and I'm not going to plead executive privilege. Mr. McGahn, will you answer this question? Nope. I plead attorney-client privilege. What? That's right. You're going to have to take me to court and invalidate my claim of attorney-client privilege now. And then I'll appeal that to the Court of Appeals. And I'll appeal that to the Supreme Court. And then they'll say, you got to go back. You got to testify. You can't plead absolute immunity. You can't plead attorney-client privilege. You can't plead executive privilege. Now go. All right. Here I go. Mr. McGahn, will you please answer the question? Nope. I plead Martian immunity. Ooh, boing. What? What's Martian immunity? I don't know. We're going to have to go to court to find out. There's no such thing. There's no blah, blah, blah. Are you telling me there's lawyers on Mars? I don't know. Maybe. That's crazy. You're just talking out of your ass. We're going to have to go find out. And we'll find out, of course, that there is no such thing as Martian immunity, and it won't help to appeal it either to the Circuit Court of Appeals or to the Supreme Court. And then he'll be ordered to go back, and he's not allowed to say, so this little piggy won't be allowed to go to market. This little piggy won't be allowed to stay home. This little piggy will have no roast beef. This little piggy, who once had none, will be given the entire world's supply, the Gestalt roast beef. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Whatever. It doesn't matter. He'll just plead another thing until Trump's out of office, one way or another. Heart attack, impeachment, actually honoring the Constitution's 2-term limit. I don't know what it'll be. At which point they'll say, well, now you can't impeach, even though you can. But everyone will decide it's better off just getting rid of him. And we're tired of this thing. And how do we know it will work this way? Because it has already worked this way when we sued everybody in the Bush administration who refused to testify. And it took 2 years, and they appealed, and we went around and around in circles until finally they were ordered to testify, and the Trump administration or the Bush administration rather, was out of office, and everybody said, you know what? To hell with it already. We're done. And that's what they're looking to do here. And Glenn Kirshner was there to hear McGahn's lawyer tell the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, by some reckoning the second highest court in the land, yes, my plan is, when I lose, to ignore the whole thing and start over again. Just like that idiot guy on the radio said. Oh, well, maybe we should be listening. Well, maybe you should. But okay, you're not. All right. That's it for the domestic side of things, I think. I don't know. We'll see what else comes up. Internationally, back on perhaps back on the Iraq front, I had a couple other things that I had set aside, which I guess I'll just at least put on the record quickly, maybe. About Soleimani himself. And of course, we're now all embroiled in the debate over who was this guy, and was he, in fact, as the administration now wants us to believe, responsible for hundreds or maybe even thousands of American deaths, and surely on his way to murder thousands more when he was stopped in a defensive assassination by drone, by the way, for those of you who hate the drones. And I thought that was interesting. And I've seen some very interesting points made about it on Twitter, of all places, including, let's see, who made this claim? Adam Kotsko, who I was not familiar with. It's just a writer, teacher, and translator. Just a regular guy pointing out that when Mike Pence on last Friday, January 3rd, trotted out the line, not only getting the whole thing about 9/11 wrong with 10 of the 12 terrorists. Remember, we were talking about that, despite the fact that there were 19. By the way, what a lame charge that was, even. So even if there were 12 terrorists, and they tried to clean that up, too. Spokespeople for Pence and the White House tried to say, 12 of the 19 terrorists traveled to Afghanistan. I don't know if the numbers are right there. Are we saying that 7 of them never set foot in Afghanistan or something like that? Maybe that's even true. So the claim was that 12 of them went to Afghanistan at some point, and 10 of those 12 out of the 19 had their travel, I don't know, what was the claim, arranged for, paid for, something, by Soleimani, which is like, I guess, the most incidental of all things. They did, of course, hijack a bunch of airplanes and smash them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and I guess attempting to fly one into the Capitol, or crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. So it was kind of a big deal. But the true story behind it all is that Qasem Soleimani bought them all Impossible Whoppers while they were staying over at his place in Afghanistan. I mean, that's just such a dumb part of the story, but they latch onto it. The idea, of course, being to connect his name with 9/11 and to basically have it come away. They wanted crowds at the Trump rallies to walk away and say, this is the guy who did 9/11. Sure, Obama was president when Osama bin Laden was tracked down and killed. And everybody's like, oh, well, he killed the guy who did 9/11. But how can we take that away from him? By saying that the guy who really did 9/11, the guy who invited everybody over to watch the game in Afghanistan, is the one who really did 9/11. And now we got him, and Trump got the guy. That's what really happened. And Adam Kotsko was just pointing out the ridiculousness of what we were being asked to believe here. That, wow, turns out that the guy Trump assassinated was responsible for 9/11. It's weird that we never heard anything about that guy in the nearly 20 years since 9/11, despite near constant advocacy of war with Iran. You would think that maybe his name would have come up, and it didn't. And we were saying that nobody knew who he was at the outset. And we made fun of the fact that Hugh Hewitt thought it was funny, but Trump had never, well, he didn't think it was funny. He thought it was, I don't know what he thought, but that Trump had never heard of him. But I have to admit, I had never heard of him either. And most people hadn't. And, that's just the way it really was. And for some reason, we had a hard time believing that. Anyway, an even better proof of the concept, though, was offered up by the Twitter denizen known as, how will we say this? So his address is Tom Coke is a blunt. I don't know what that means. It's spelled C-O-K-E like the soda, not K-O-C-H like the douchebag. But Tom Coke is a blunt. What does it mean? I don't know. Ask him. He also goes by, you fill in the other name there that's not your actual handle there. Tom Coca-Cola. Okay. What does Tom Coca-Cola have to do with any of this? He offered everybody a little bit of Twitter fun. He said, here's a fun thing to do. Copy and paste the following into your Twitter search bar. And basically it is a little algorithm that lets you search anybody on Twitter, any username that you identify, and show me any tweets that person ever wrote from the beginning of Twitter, which is alleged here to be March 21st, 2006, until today. Well, of course, he did that on January 2nd, and you would have to update that now. But, well, you know what? It wouldn't even count. Actually, January 2nd, I guess, is when we found out that this assassination had taken place. If we find out that somebody's tweeting about Soleimani after the assassination, that doesn't count, right? So, tell me all the tweets that whatever person has ever sent mentioning the name Soleimani from the beginning of Twitter until now. This will show, as he says, how many times somebody mentioned Soleimani, the world's worst bad guy, between the day Twitter started and today. And here are some examples. Here is Liz Wheeler, who's obviously an evil person, but with whom I'm less familiar. Here's Liz Wheeler describing how uniquely horrible Soleimani was. And then, of course, the search results. So after the assassination, she says, Soleimani killed 603 American service members. It's very, very precise. Soleimani maimed thousands more with IEDs. Soleimani approved the attack of the U.S. Embassy. The one in Baghdad was under attack just the other day. That was him. He was plotting to kill more Americans. I love the way that's put. Soleimani did this. Soleimani maimed thousands. Soleimani approved the attack on the U.S. Embassy. Soleimani created new Coke and Crystal Pepsi. Which one's worse? You tell me. He was plotting to kill more Americans. Yes, he deserves to be dead. If you're lamenting his death, you hate Trump more than a terrorist. Let me mull that over for a little bit. I might hate Trump more than terrorists, but I hate them in different ways, but equally. Maybe Trump more, because he's closer to me, and he's grosser looking too. So maybe that's my only complaint. Anyway, somebody like Liz Wheeler has certainly been spending time between 2006 and 2020 lamenting that Soleimani's still alive, right? No, she's never said a goddamn thing about Soleimani, ever. Tom goes on and checks Ari Fleischer, who's tweeting, he's really forwarding somebody else's, again, very specific tweet thread complaining about the many evils perpetrated by Soleimani. No results for Ari Fleischer. No results for anybody, of course. Ben Shapiro comes up next. No results from him. No results from Mitch McConnell. No results from who? Seth Mandel? I can't even. I don't know which lunatic this one is. What I'm hearing from Twitter idiots, says Seth, we should not have intervened to stop Soleimani from killing Americans because then Iran would retaliate. He's got the blood of hundreds of American troops on his hands. You psychotic ghouls. Never mentioned the man once, ever. As same for Jesse Kelly, same for what's his name, Jack Posobiec, Mike Glenn, who I don't know who the hell that is anymore. Mark Meadows, I know him, and of course Donald Trump. Not a single mention. So very interesting, great project, and I was glad to see it done. Fascinating look at the way the world works these days. All right, so we have just a few minutes left before wrapping things up for today. So let's limit it to small tidbits that I think I can get through before we wind things up. I guess, first of all, let me double back again. I got a lot of doubling back to do because of the nature of the programming today. Back to the Ukrainian airliner that went down outside of Tehran. I'll share with you a tweet that embedded the film of the flaming plane crashing into the ground and exploding. It's rather shocking to see. But I guess I mentioned it to you that there were reports anyway, and I hope I characterized them properly, but I don't know whether I remember I said they were unconfirmed reports or not. But it is unconfirmed via a Persian Gulf news source, Al Hadath, saying that the downed Ukrainian aircraft outbound from Tehran was accidentally shot down by Iranian anti-aircraft units and were warned by one of our good Iranian-American friends, Kombiz, who says that people would have reported hearing anti-aircraft fire in Tehran. Trust me, I know what that sounds like, and it's not a sound you mistake. and we haven't heard anything about that from his feed from Iranian reporters. And the source is produced, but Al Hadath, it is pointed out that, again, it's a news source out of Dubai, and we're reminded that there is a Cold War state between Iran and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So, you can't be certain of anything. I guess anything could have a propaganda twist to it, but it seems plain enough that this aircraft has gone down. The video, I don't think anybody's disputing that the plane was on fire on the way down. They just don't know how it got on fire. So that's the speculative part, at least for now. Maybe by morning time, maybe by air time, we know more. We'll double back and check that out on Thursday. The other things that I wanted to double back for, I did happen to see a tweet, and so I grabbed it and stuck away in pocket. Dr. Lucy Jones, a seismologist, answering our questions about the earthquakes in Puerto Rico, saying that all of the quakes in Puerto Rico since December 29th can be considered one earthquake sequence. Let's read a little bit about it. I guess sequences come in different sizes, and this is clearly an active one. More M5s, I guess that's magnitude 5s, are likely. Another magnitude 6 possible. It takes a while for a region to settle down after quakes have stressed it. The magnitude of a quake is controlled by the fault area that moves. If the whole fault moves in the first quake, it will be followed by small quakes as everything readjusts. If only part moves, the stress from the first one can trigger another part of the fault to move. Very interesting. By the way, one more note here. Foreshocks don't look different from any other quake. The best guess is that when you have a lot of quakes, you have a lot of quakes. It's not really much of a guess, is it? An active sequence will stay active, but all sequences decay with time, and this one will too. So hopefully that means the worst is over there. I guess that's probably what she was trying to answer there. And I guess that's all for the best. Let's see, other small-ish items that might fit into our discussion here. Yes, here we are. New incident at Mar-a-Lago. Back to Mar-a-Lago again. Under criminal investigation by Secret Service. This according to the Miami Herald. Let's see if we can't get this one in. But to add this to the 2 Chinese spies at this point have been arrested on the grounds of Mar-a-Lago. No problem, because he's just walking around Mar-a-Lago giving away the fact that we're going to be striking Iran sometime soon. This time, another one. Secret Service is investigating a new incident at Trump's Mar-a-Lago club. Sarah Blasky and Nicholas Nehamas, I suppose, reporting for the Miami Herald on this one. The ritzy Mar-a-Lago club, I don't know about that. One-time Jeffrey Epstein hangout, and the Herald has a good claim on that one. A one-time Jeffrey Epstein hangout. Thanks for reminding us. Target of eccentric intruders, nexus of an ongoing counterintelligence investigation, had another unusual occurrence on Monday evening. Palm Beach police say they're conducting an open and active criminal investigation at the club, also President Donald Trump's South Florida home, as it happens, following an unspecified incident. What could it be? All right, let's make sure all of our music is ready to go as we read about it. The Secret Service is leading the investigation, and no arrest has been made, according to the Palm Beach Police Department. During an encounter with local law enforcement, an individual made non-threatening statements about a person under Secret Service protection. I wonder, might that be Eric is so hot? I don't know. What do you think the comments were? Anyway, that's all we've got here to go with on this one. An individual made non-threatening statements about a person under Secret Service protection. Is that a problem even? A law enforcement official with knowledge of the incident told the Miami Herald, as part of standard practice, Palm Beach police contacted the local Secret Service office. Secret Service, of course, protects the president and members of his family. The president had left for D.C. more than 24 hours earlier. Michael Ogrodnik, the Palm Beach police spokesman, or at least one of them, declined to comment on Tuesday, citing the investigation, but the department did provide a nearly completely redacted incident report showing officers were called around 7 p.m. to assist another law enforcement agency. As a matter of practice, the Secret Service does not confirm or comment on the absence or existence of our criminal investigations, so no help there. Palm Beach Police Report also mentions the involvement of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. No comment from them. While law enforcement officials would not discuss the nature of the investigation, Mar-a-Lago security has been breached repeatedly since Trump became president. The private club and mansion has witnessed several high-profile trespassing incidents. We're, of course, familiar with all of them, but add another one to the list, and another great mystery that will hopefully be unraveled in reporting
From Daily Kos
of the
Radio
Miami Herald.
on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
All right, well, we'll see if we can't find out more information about that in our next live broadcast. We'll be back Thursday. Sorry to miss another fantastic opportunity to talk with Joan McCarter this Wednesday. We'll see if we can't get a make good for you. I know everyone's been waiting for her to return to our airwaves, but stay tuned now for Justice Putnam next.